We might be.
I think we are.
I'm going to call to order the City Council work session for CDV's Grand Forks for Tuesday, October 26, 2021. Is now 5 o'clock. Would City Clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Seegander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olson.
Here.
Council Vice President Tim Riefel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Fetter.
Here.
Dale Helms.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Merce.
Present.
Brian Larson.
Does determine quorum. Number one, update from the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. Mr. Seifert, how you doing, Marty?
Having me. I wasn't sure if you all got in your packet. Yeah, it looks like you have it on there. There's a little chart that we had forwarded to you guys on just the items that we worked on this session. So just by way of background, make sure it's okay, like it says on here. My name's Marty Seifert. I work with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, which is a group of 109 only rural cities that work on issues as directed by the Board of Directors for us to work on at the legislative session. Flaherty and Hood is our employer. And I've come up to your city now for quite a few years, and you're probably tired of hearing from me, but try to give you guys a little bit of a flavor of what we're doing at the Capitol. So on your computer, there should be a chart that looks like this, and on the upper left it'll say local government aid. This has always been a top priority for our group, mainly because many of our cities are just very much dependent on it. I do want to thank Senator Johnson, Representative Keel, for being very responsive on the LGA issue as it uniquely impacts cities in this area. East Grand Forks chiefly, but also Warroad, Detroit Lakes to the south of here, where these formula anomalies have had you going down in your LGA. And we've been trying to get our arms around it. We had a bill that you guys had worked on. And the easiest solution for the legislature would have been to do nothing. They picked the second easiest solution, which was a good solution, at least in the short term, which was to plug the hole for those cities going backwards and keeping your LGA even for another year. You in particular have been one of those cities that if we just do nothing, it's just going to keep harming you. And so Senator Nelson is the new chair of the tax committee. It was her first time chairing it. And we gave her different suggestions. And of course, as you know, the legislature fumbles around. They don't get their job done on time. They go into special session. They're staring the July 1st deadline of the government shutdown in the face. And they're kind of like, well, how can we fix this without just picking one city and redoing all of the formula for one city? And it's like, well, you can give us an appropriation to just keep them whole for a year, and then let's try to fix the formula. So we're probably going to have a stakeholder group put together on the formula. Representative Marquardt's very interested. It is something that's overdue. We haven't worked on it for about 7 years now. And we are very mindful of your situation. So, you know, we will probably have a seat at the table in that stakeholder group next year. But in particular, if you look at this chart, it was the Senate that took the lead on that. Senator Nelson had asked, and I do want to give credit to Senator Johnson for being very responsive and kind of pushing the envelope on that, because he's got two cities that are impacted by this, Warroad, where he just came from, and you guys. So this was an offense-defense year. We were on offense in LGA when we got some increases 2 years ago. This year, with the deficit being certified going into this year with COVID and all the shutdowns, there was some behind-the-scenes discussion. Should we meter back payments? Should we hold back payments? Should we cut LGA? Whatever, which they could have done. When you certify a deficit, the governor has unallotment powers, but they didn't do that. We met with the Revenue Department, explained how important it was. As all of you know, once you certify your levy in December, you're done. You can't raise your levy. You can't. A lot of your union negotiations are done, and all you have is your reserves. And so, you know, we have to explain that to people who don't always understand. We don't have a lot of tools in the toolbox. Once your levy's set, once your contracts are signed, you're kind of in for it with your budget. So we were very glad to see that. And some people ask, how did you go from this multi-billion-dollar deficit to a surplus? The short answer is the federal government rained literally billions of dollars down in the state of Minnesota. There's no way that we'd have a balanced budget without the federal government coming in and dumping all this money in. In fact, there was so much money, some of the appropriations chairs didn't even know what to do with it toward the end of the session. That's why in this chart I'll kind of explain a couple of those. Like childcare, we asked for $20 million, and we ended up getting over $22 million. In some cases, we got more money than we even asked for. So the federal government obviously threw a lot of money around, and, you know, it's kind of one of those things where you spend it or you lose it. So that's the LGA issue. The next two, the Public Facilities Authority, and as you know, that's a lot with your sewer and water plants, water treatment. That chiefly goes to rural Minnesota, not exclusively. There was no bonding bill this year. That's usually in the off year. This was the budget year. So we had no bonding bill, but we did sneak in $16 million in the legacy bill, and that's that extra sales tax you pay for arts and crafts and environment, whatever they advertise it for. So we took a little bit of that environmental money and put that into the PFA. Source reduction initiative, there's a stakeholder group that's working on some solid waste recovery issues. Child care are the next three. The facilities grant program got $22.5 million. That's a competitive grant program if you're working on child care, looking at putting centers together. War Road, for example, is looking at building a child care center. That's some money that they can access for that with some corporate partners or initiative foundations or what have you, private enterprises. In the initiative foundations, we did get some millions of dollars for them to do some business development and training grants for people who are interested in child care, want to open up a center, want to do in-home daycare, but not sure how the business plan works or food safety guidelines or all the things that go along with health and so forth. And there's a regulatory component to all of this too. I mean, we have a lot of our in-home providers in particular that are getting regulated out of business, and neighboring states don't have some of these things. I think some of you may know that Warren here a couple years ago wanted to have a child care center put together. They had two ladies very interested, but neither of them had a 4-year degree, so the state of Minnesota said, well, you have to have a 4-year degree to love kids apparently, and so they just said never mind. And so it's things like that that frustrate people. We heard the same from a city in southern Minnesota where they make them do in-person training, not by Zoom or computer, but in-person training, and nothing is offered within 80 miles of where they are. So they have to shut their center down. They have to go listen to the same people the same year after year. They could be doing things like that on Zoom and modernizing things. So we're trying to get our arms around that, and at our conferences we've been discussing this at length. Next page, Greater Minnesota BDPI, that's if you're going to retain or bring in a business to your community. This program helps pay for public infrastructure. We're not going to pay for your private roof or your private business, but we will pay for things like sewer pipes, water lines, service roads that can help your business move into a rural community. That's an only rural program and is not allowed in the metro area. No bonding bill this year, but we did get $3.5 million in cash to keep that afloat. Next three items are all housing. There was no bonding bill, so the infrastructure grant program, which is a new idea, didn't get funded. The fix-up program was trying to get a concept of fixing up old housing instead of building brand new stuff. Workforce Development Fund got $4 million. We've been doing some investigating on where the money is going in the housing programs. There's been an awful lot of focus on low-income housing and precious little on workforce housing. And in our communities, mainly workforce housing is the challenge. Our people are working, they're middle income or low to middle income working class people that might need some assistance on getting things where market failure is taking place in a housing area, but they're not interested necessarily in a lot of our communities in the low income side of things. So that's where we're kind of having a battle with the housing department on that, because when they think housing, they just think, well, we're just going to build a bunch of apartment buildings for low-income people who aren't working. A lot of our communities they're looking more on making it affordable housing for people who work. And then lastly, on city streets, and you are in the over 5,000 category, and congratulations on being a growing community, by the way, in the census. I was glad to see that. You know, we always lobby for both sides of the over 5,000, under 5,000. There'll be an incremental increase for those cities over 5,000, but nothing to write home about. For the small cities under 5,000, as you know, they do not get money under the Minnesota Constitution. About 59% state highway fund, 29% goes to counties. About 9% goes to cities under over 5,000. So all those little cities up here that are surrounding you don't get any street aid unless we lobby for a specific appropriation, and that's what that bottom chart is. And we're able to get $18 million for them. But for cities of your size, you get an automatic appropriation through the constitutional formula. So with that, I will open it up for any questions you might have.
Does anybody have any questions at all?
Or concerns, if you want me to bring something back to the board.
I guess it'd be the same as any other time. By all means, keep two-way communication, and as you come to crunch time on any of these initiatives that you have, when you need us there, give us a little bit of lead time, and we'd love to get down and speak to the cause of what you're fighting for. That, of course, is also our cause as well. So keep us in the loop, and we'll join in.
For sure. And the LGA issue is, and we bug you probably more than you want to be bugged about it, but
No, never.
we have a lot of back and forth on trying to get that brought up. But other than just keeping it even, it's better than just letting it alone and having to get knocked down 80 to 100,000 again. So we will, and if they have an open slot for mayor, council in rural Minnesota, if you guys are interested in having a seat at the table, usually they'll give us a seat as an organization, but we'll be very mindful of your concern. The league, obviously, it's everybody, Minneapolis, the suburbs, so they get a little bit conflicted. We can be a little more parochial about it because we're the rural folks.
I know Representative Marquardt really gets it. We've worked closely with him in the past, and he's in Dilworth, right?
Correct.
So, he's kind of right where we are also, toward the North Dakota border, toward a smaller city. He's good to work with.
Yeah, we're very mindful Detroit Lakes is similar in their treatment like you guys are, and that's the biggest city, ironically, in his district. So we've been hiding behind their skirt a little bit, too. Like, oh, hey, Detroit Lakes is losing. Oh, by the way, East Grand Forks can benefit from this. So, they're both in the coalition, but you guys have some of the similar formula anomalies. County seats, northwestern Minnesota, losing LGA.
Thank you for your work for us.
Yep. Well, I'm glad we could plug the hole for a year. So we'll try to keep at it and get you an increase.
Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you again for coming. I know in November we're going to kind of start getting a preview about the opioid case or whatever, and the money and all those type of things that are come out. Is there any preview that you have for us about timelines that we should be anticipating, as far as if there's ideas that we have, or is this going to affect cities, or is it going to be all run through counties, or do we have any ideas?
That's a fantastic lead-in. Our fall conference, and I don't know if you're sending anyone to the fall conference, but our fall conference in Wilmer on the it's around 18th, 19th, 20th, around that time frame, that Thursday, Friday. Attorney General Ellison and a panel of policymakers, I think Representative Baker, who's on the opioid task force, is from Wilmer. He's going to be there as well. They're going to walk through our cities that are at the conference. Here's how much money is available, what it's for, cities are eligible, and here's the time frame of eligibility, and here's how to apply for it. So very timely. If you can send someone to the conference, we had a lot of interest in that money.
I just didn't know if it's going to go through the counties or if it's going to be cities.
Yeah, I thought they had both. At least that was the preliminary, and that could change between now and November, but it's coming up here in a few weeks. They're going to kind of unveil to our group, here's what we've got. So we'll be one of the first, I think maybe the first group they actually present to.
Good.
It's good timing.
Do you know if they're going to have everybody at all open down there in case we want to go down and meet with people?
Yes, we are having an in-person conference. I know the House of Representatives said we're not going to open our building up again, and I think they're backtracking a lot on that, starting January 31st. But our conference is in person at Wilmer, and we are right now, at least, unless there's some major variant or whatever, we're planning on having that because we've got 2 legislative panels, the Attorney General, and a whole variety of other people that are planning on coming and presenting.
How about during a session? I know you said the House doesn't.
The Senate's supposed to, I'm going to be talking to Senator Johnson here tonight, but the Senate, as my understanding, is going to be in-person committees and allowing people into the building to visit their legislators. The House is not. I'm not sure how that's going to work because I've gotten 15 invitations to in-person fundraisers from the same people who said we can't meet in person. So I'm trying to reconcile on what that's all about. So I would like to, I'd like to think that maybe they've changed their mind on not having that, because it does make a big difference. You know, my hat's off to Representative Marquardt. He's always been good about us meeting with him on LGA or anything, but in some cases, last session when they were shut down, I'd meet with legislators at McGovern's or, you know, other restaurants kind of around there. But, you know, I have a lot, because I served in the legislature, I have their cell numbers and da-da-da, but a lot of people don't have that stuff, so what are they supposed to do? So it's frustrating for constituents.
Yeah, because we plan on hopefully sometime next session be down there off and on, just another thing, so.
Yeah, let us know, and sometimes we have House members that'll come up to our conference room, because we're only a block away, and they'll come meet with you if you're interested, so give us a heads up, absolutely. Appreciate it.
Anybody else have anything? Steve?
Mr. Seifert, you had mentioned money for roads. I'm assuming, being a state aid city, those are the typical funds that we receive annually as our state aid allocations?
Yep.
There's not another pot of money out there?
There's, if they do local road and bridge funding in the bonding bill this next year, you could get some designated money, and they've kind of, I don't want to say they've tapped out the ability to bond through the trunk highway fund, but they've maxed the credit card out pretty heavily in the bonding bill we had a year and a half ago. But if you have street aid projects that you feel relate to health, safety, that kind of thing, you know, we lobbied for Sartell individually, and I got them a couple $1 million in the bonding bill. But it was a specific project relating to in front of their hospital with growth development, safety, et cetera. But periodically, the bonding bill will get a good 50 to 100 million injection out of the trunk highway fund.
So you're aware too, the bonding committee came here and heard our testimony on our need for south end bridges. And they are seriously considering a big dollar commitment to a south end bridge for us. So you can kind of be aware of that too and watch it maybe coming through the Senate. And I know Representative Keel has also started that process a little bit on the House side. So we could be, if North Dakota can prioritize it and Grand Forks to the same level that we can, and some of the other steps that they would have to take, we may have a chance at a pretty significant project down there.
Okay, what's the price tag on that, just so I'm aware?
30 million?
34, wasn't it?
Depends whether we get two or one.
Yeah, each bridge, 30 million
So is this in total or your part of it?
total
Total, okay.
per bridge.
Are we assuming half price and North Dakota pays the other half? Okay. Yeah, and have you talked to Congresswoman Fishbach at all about it being a federal issue potentially, since it's a multi-state?
She's aware of it. When we had our intergovernmental retreat, her rep was here, and he's aware then of this. Colin Peterson, back before he left, said, if they bring back earmarks, I could see including that. And I don't know if we've gotten the exact same commitment from Representative Fishbach.
Okay.
And yet that would be very important, I think, to bring in every funding source that we can.
Okay, so that'd be Calvin Benson probably is the
Okay.
guy up here. Okay. All right, I'll make note of that when I see those guys.
Thank you.
The bonding bill has to have support on all sides because it needs a 60% majority, so everybody kind of has a say in it if they have a project, so it's helpful. Are there any other bonding projects, Crookston, East Grand Forks, War Road, this neck of the woods has that you're, particularly other than the bridge in this, like Polk County, that you'd want me to be aware of?
I do not know of any. Does anyone else?
Okay.
Maybe check with Senator Johnson. He'd have a good idea.
Okay.
Please.
We just like, for our members, we like to keep an eye out.
For sure.
For you folks when there's bonding projects, and sometimes people don't tell us, so, we usually need to know. That's good. Okay. Anything else? I'm off to Warren then. All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, move on to number 2, updated on 2050 land use plan. Teri, Kouba.
Hello. I'm going to, our consultant with WSB is here to finalize, help us send us down the final stretch. We have a final, this is the draft, and we will be presenting the final, hopefully in November to you guys. We would definitely want to hear any kind of comments or things you're seeing that is not quite sitting right. So I will let Eric do his thing.
Thank you, Teri. Thank you, Council President and City Council. Before we start, this is the same presentation, just in WSB's format. Did that a little bit to recognize all the parties that have been involved. As I'm sure most of us in the room are aware, your land use plan gets updated every 5 years in conjunction with the MPO, so that way the MPO can update their traffic analysis numbers and the like. Yourselves, the MPO, have partnered with WSP, and then we had another firm, CDG, which did a lot of our public engagement. Antonio Rosario, he was very helpful through a number of the scenarios. But to start with, the report has 6 sections. We're going to review basically sections 2 through 6. Community background is the, excuse me for 1 minute. This is not the right one. This is, there was a folder that was dated.
Oh, I didn't click on the folder.
There's a folder with today's date, if I can.
You should be able to end, sure.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. There we go. Sorry. All right. Now we'll get there.
May again.
Again, we mentioned all the parties that are involved. I'm going to use my clicker. I think that will work better. So the project timeline, this got kicked off last August and then was formed with the steering committee, and the first steering committee meeting was last September. A lot of the background data, including a couple technical memos that came back and forth with the MPO and city staff, occurred before the project website was kicked off in late 2020. And so the majority of the work has occurred since about a year ago, November of 2020. That started with a wiki map that was on the project website that allowed people to put pins and state issues that were important to them. They were in a number of different categories, from bicycle and ped, transportation, land use, etc. That information is in the appendix of the comprehensive plan, or the land use plan, which is on the project website. So in January, we had steering committee number 2, which discussed the population and land use projections, and then we had a couple other public engagement activities there, the online survey in January and February, the first open house on February 22nd, and then online survey basically end of February through March, in which we got together with the steering committee meeting number 3 then in June, where we not only looked at the public engagement, but looked at the goals and policies that would take your 2045 land use plan, update it, and include all the public engagement that was received. Following that, there was the update of the land use map, as well as implementation, which we'll go into a little bit more here in the next couple slides. Got us to open house number 2, and then the steering, we had our draft plan, which the steering committee reviewed on September 27th, the planning commission reviewed on October 14th, and you're reviewing here today. So included in that is basically the approval process. As I stated, the Planning Commission reviewed the draft plan, which is on the project website, on October 14th. Again, the City Council is reviewing it today. Following that review, we will make any amendments necessary, and we will start the review process for the final plan, which includes on October 10th, both the Planning Commission meeting and then the MPO TAC meeting. The City Council would be asked to adopt the land use plan on November 16th, and then the MPO executive policy would receive that the following day. So there are 6 sections to the land use plan, starting with the introduction, community background, public engagement, goals and policies, land use plan, and implementation. We're going to review sections 2 through 6 here today in this presentation. To begin with, the community background covers a number of topics. Here on the right-hand side, we have not only the historic, but the projected population for East Grand Forks. And then one of the figures I really like is the one on the bottom right, which is the population pyramid. Not only does it show by age cohort where your largest part of your population is, and that's there between basically 25 and 55. It also shows, by sex, that breakout, and which is pretty typical of at age 75. There's a much larger percent female than male. So that's one piece of information that we had. Next, we looked at households and local economy. So we looked at the household income broken out by number of households. And then the second graph is the amount of people that come into East Grand Forks to work. That is the inflow. The remaining, the 909, are the people who live in East Grand Forks and work in East Grand Forks. And then the outflow is the amount of people who leave East Grand Forks to work. So looking at how the breakout of the population and the economy come together. From there, obviously, we are able to identify opportunities and concerns from this existing data. So the next set was the public engagement, which I described a little bit through the timeline. But we have included all that information in the appendix of the land use plan and described how we use that public engagement to create the goals and policies and implementation. On the right-hand side are 2 graphics. One was part of survey number 2, in which they would have a scenario or a graphic, and they would pick which one they thought was most comfortable. And then the wiki map is on the bottom. The different types of issues that were brought up, kind of grouped by category, that helped us really influence the type of information we wanted to have in our goals and policies. So that's where we're moving to next. We have the goals and policies that were influenced by the public engagement we received. And then we adjusted the goals and policies that you had currently in the 2045 plan. So they're organized by 5 topics. The housing, economic development, and urban expansion areas are listed here. Housing, we have 1 policy to promote development and expansion in neighborhoods. Economic development, we actually have 2 policies. Part of that is because the first one applies generally across the entire city. The second one is more specific to the downtown. The urban expansion areas plan for that logical expansion beyond the existing municipal boundaries. And then the last 2 goals were parks and recreation and then transportation. So there's the 1 goal for parks and recreation of creating and maintaining that park system. But transportation, there ends up being 3 goals. The first, tying transportation system with land use and development. Second is specific to the types of infrastructure, particularly that it's multimodal. And then finally, plan for that current and future growth needed. So between the goals, we have the land use policy, and with those 2 together, we'll get to the implementation. But this is the existing land use plan, so the land use plan from 2045. You see that the majority of the growth is within the city limits, but there's kind of equally residential growth north outside of the city limits, and some residential and more mixed use on the south. And then you see towards the east is ability of more commercial and industrial. What we did to help inform that was take that population calculation and apply that across all land uses, basically based on the region's breakout by land uses. So not just East Grand Forks, but East Grand Forks and Grand Forks together. So looking at how much commercial or industrial would need to grow to support the population growth. And so those are pretty important factors when we're looking at what would become the 2050 land use map. We kept all the categories the same. You will note that we have the 2 potential bridge alignments for the South River crossing. But looking at the population projection through 2050, there is not much need for a lot of land outside of the current city limits. And then you'll see with the next map, there is quite a bit of land still within the city limits that is available for development. And then we're calling out for the phasing in 5-year periods of the land beyond the city limits itself. So I'm going to go back to the previous slide just to show on the north side, really concentrating growth basically along 220 north. On the south side, really concentrating growth along that southern city limits. The east stays pretty much the same when we're looking at commercial and industrial. The one thing I would state is one change that the EDA had recommended was we had areas broken out for commercial only, and then we had areas that were commercial and industrial, and then we had areas that were industrial. They asked that we take the commercial and add that to the commercial industrial to provide more flexibility. You will see that the new river bridges fall into that agricultural category. That's because that's the demand we're looking at now. Something that is, a game changer like that new South River Bridge could really affect not only how much growth the community has, but where it occurs. That's why we wanted those alignments, but without knowing when or where it's going to occur, there wasn't an opportunity to provide a real land use recommendation. So that's how we wanted to tie it together. The other piece that we included in the land use component is the development process itself. Not only did we call out the existing plans and standards that all developments need to follow, from either East Grand Forks, Minnesota Department of Transportation, could also be some school safety regulations and transit planning. We also included the documents that will be used when a development comes forward by, your staff, like Nancy behind us. So not only is there some federal highway documents and some other design guidelines more specific to multimodal transportation, there's existing parking plans. There's also existing plans for crossings and infrastructure. One of the things that was added as a result of our 4th steering committee meeting was adding not only the city's access spacing guidelines, but also MnDOT's access spacing guidelines. So these are all documents that are used throughout the development process, and by putting them in your plan, you're essentially indicating that these are the adopted documents to consider when looking at development. We did carry over one important component from the 2045 land use plan, which are these 3 area concept plans. There's the location 1, which is the northwest corner of 23rd Street Northwest in Minnesota 220. There's the area that is north and east of Highway 2 in the city limits, and then the area that's south of 16th Street on both sides of Reinhardt Drive. These specific concept plans show different types of block patterns. They show where bikes, sidewalks, trails could be located. So it's a template of how to develop in a more granular nature, which is very helpful, and we carried over work that was done by SRF from the 2045 land use plan. So the final section is the implementation. What this does is take the goals, that's the header, and then take the policies on the left-hand side, talk about what's currently happening to implement those policies, and then make identifications of steps that are needed both in the short term and the long term to implement those policies. And then finally, who is responsible for those activities. So it's essentially a guidebook to your staff and yourselves and the Planning Commission of, if you wish to implement these policies, these are the activities that will either need to continue or occur new, but also identifying who are the parties that need to be involved. This was very helpful when we met with the steering committee, which is, members of the education system in town, the Chamber of Commerce, important institutions, other government entities. So we all came together to not only agree on what are the policies that are important to incorporate, but who's going to be involved in each one of these policies. This is just one example. For all the goals and all the policies within those goals, we created these same tables. So the draft plan is on the project website, egfplan.org, and I am here for any questions you may have.
Mr. DeBerz, I know you had one earlier. You still have it? Okay.
Oh, why, thanks. But I like to go last. Just a question, and when we move into kind of a combined commercial industrial land use, will that carry to any different zoning classifications?
That is one of the policies that is underneath the commercial category. So there were activities that are talked about, such as identifying what businesses are in town, what programs or classes the college offers, making sure that either if there are classes the college offers that we could identify those businesses in back. Then discussion about how you should review your zoning ordinance, but we're not making any assumptions that review would say creating a new zoning ordinance, changing this activity. A number of the policies did talk about how to implement good design in your development. So your zoning code has basics like height and setback, maybe impervious surface. Those other documents in that development review process really start to get to some of those designs. So we wanted to make sure that all the other good planning activities that either were done by the city or the region as a whole are included within that development. I think Nancy.
Yeah, I'll just go further. Part of the goals and policies, if you look, it talks about reviewing types of businesses.
Oh, I didn't know it was on to me. Types of businesses we want to attract, those that are interested, things that are kind of up and coming, maybe your like your clean industries, those types of things. So those would be things that we would start to address, review the Grand Forks ordinance, their zoning ordinances, kind of see what's locally, kind of a hot business or something that we would hope to attract. And then what we would do is we would review then our specific zoning districts and see what we'd like to add. If we'd like to add any permitted uses or conditional uses, special use permits within that zoning district. We did do an update in 2018 with some of those things that we knew were kind of up and coming that people were interested in. But it always is good then too to work with the EDA and the Downtown Development Association, who did have a big role in our goals and policies, to go through them to see kind of what they're seeing as kind of those new upcoming businesses or occupations or roles that niches that we haven't kind of looked at yet, and maybe kind of get ahead of it and put it in our zoning districts before they ask and we have to amend. So,
It does seem like that would give us a little more flexibility for those, whether it's a business that maybe didn't even exist before or that is emerging, like you say, or just a classification we might have missed. We saw like with the Humane Society, where do we put that? What's the ideal place for that? And so all of those things, it's always kind of an unfolding of what use is best in what area of city.
and sometimes too, Eric was kind of alluding to that, is sometimes too, you can take a special use permit and you can put architectural standards or site plan standards so that whether it's industrial or commercial, it still has the feel of the district that it's in. So it could be industrial in nature, but it, with a special use permit, having some of those requirements, it would fit into that district without, without saying, no, we won't allow manufacturing in this district because this is all commercial. We could do it if it had a similar look and feel to other commercial projects in the area. And that's kind of some things that we'll want to flesh out and work with the EDA and the DDA on, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have three things. I'll start with the most specific. On the growth phasing of the future land use plan, I don't know if it would be appropriate or not, but there has been some discussion about residential growth potentially on the east third of maybe like the CMS property. I mean, nothing formally has been done, but wondering if that could be added to maybe a midterm or I would think maybe a midterm kind of goal or something like that. At least put it in there, or maybe, I don't know. Nancy could probably fill you in on where exactly it would be, but.
And we visited about that. We were looking at a collaboration with the school district on the south end to maybe add that road, which falls into that local road program as a safety factor. So we'd have a road on the back end of South Point leading to the middle school and then running some housing along that area. And we did discuss it. We did not do a concept plan for it, but we can put it in as one of like the objectives or the policies. Like,
Yeah, and I don't think we would have to put a plan in. I just want, it doesn't show that
Yes.
as kind of
and I don't know,
potential growth area.
I know it's listed in the appendix. I'm not sure if it's listed specifically in the,
Okay.
Yeah, I think it might have been something we missed. I would say an error that we could fix here, but we did address that area in that we're referring to that blue kind of polygon towards the end. We took a look based on an aerial photo, where their buildings, their playground facilities, as well as knowing where the dike is, what would be the width to be able to put a road and houses in. So there is a yellow triangle on it blends in, unfortunately, with kind of your dike there. What we didn't do, which you point out, is we didn't identify that as a growth phase. So that's something we can address.
but we did add it. I can
Yes.
see it now. It's just a larger, where you see the dotted, there's some yellow right next to it.
I think it would be
And that
bigger
would
than
be
that, but-
residential, so.
Yeah, right here.
Okay, that's I wanted to bring that up. The two other things. First, this deals with future land use. We've talked about it a lot in the community development forum is, how does this then marry in with, say, we want to do more form-based zoning and those type of things? Can that be layered on top of this? Because it kind of goes, if we're talking about land use and then we want to do something form-based, that's a conflict, right?
Well,
Or could potentially be a conflict.
well, no, we didn't go so far as to come to what are the zoning changes you should make. But we did, both here in the public engagement, as well as added as some of the action steps to evaluate those design standards. But what happened, form-based zoning myself, I'll say, not a lot of communities implement well because form-based zoning gets away from use. It's
Right.
here's the building, here's the design, we don't care what use goes into it. That's a big change. And a lot of communities kind of fail by trying to call it form-based zoning, but they really prescribe the uses. I think what Nancy was referring to of there's ways to do design standards, specifically design standards if you do a conditional use or a special use. So maybe a long explanation. We chose not to go specifically into what kind of zoning tool you'll use, but we identified that you, as Nancy was stating, we're explaining the last comment, what type of development you need, and then look at your zoning code to figure out the best way to implement that. But we didn't go as far as identifying which specific zoning tool to use.
Okay, thank you.
And if
then-
we, just one quickly, if we were ever interested in something like that, we would probably want to run it along major corridors, so maybe like 220, Business 2, pick a couple of those types of corridors and then allow it as an overlay district. So then we would specifically set the parameters of what we wanted it to look like and possibly even then run zoning specific to that corridor. So we would just call it, overland corridor district, and then that zoning, all the zoning uses that we wanted specific to that would be shown on the zoning map, so.
And that kind of feeds into my next question is, we've traditionally in the last, 5-10 years or whatever, or maybe it's probably been longer than that since the flood and stuff, but we've just done our land use up to our flood control. I'm wondering if, we legally have the right to go to 2 miles outside of our city limits, correct? I'm wondering at what point, or is it to our benefit to start looking at zoning outside of that area and become a little bit more aggressive with that, making sure, I guess we're just butting up into, now we're talking about major corridors, we're talking about, if you're looking at Highway 2, Highway 220, what kind of effects do we want to have down those corridors? And obviously, I don't want to change the entire land use plan in the last month, but at some point, I think we need to be a little bit more aggressive with how we zone as a city.
That's another one we specifically chose not to figure out the right method, but we have a couple of tasks in the urban expansion area goal that need to be accomplished. That was a very good discussion at the last 2 steering committee meetings. While we didn't have township representatives, we did have county representatives, and talking about, I think it was most specifically on the south side, but issues of you have 2 townships that have their own control, the county which has some level of control, and then what level of control does the city have. Another method, but is, I wouldn't say better or worse, is orderly annexation agreements. And so we didn't specifically call out what is the right method to kind of have either premature land use control or orderly land use control. So I think there's a couple different methods to do it. Other parties that need to be at the table. So we just identified that task needs to occur, but didn't come to a conclusion of the right method. Nancy, do you think that was a good summary?
Yes, yeah, because I was going to say 2 things with that. In the state of Minnesota, you really only have subdivision control over that 2-mile extraterritorial, not zoning like they do on the Grand Forks side. So we can't technically zone out beyond our city limits. We can review subdivisions. And only reviewing subdivisions if the township does not have their own ordinance, because in the state of Minnesota, the township supersedes the city's extraterritorial. So we can fine tune it, but Huntsville obviously has their own zoning ordinance, and so their subdivision regs kind of supersede ours. The county has been good about sharing subdivisions and things like that, so that we've been able to review and try to reserve right-of-way and look at easements, placements, if we were to ever bring it into the city, when we'd have to put utilities. So we have been doing some of that with the county. So that's where we're at, addressing that answer. 2 would be just looking at our growth projections. It's going to take a while before we expand out beyond our flood control. And so at this point in time, I didn't, trying to get out beyond that, the dike, just didn't seem like it would be.
I think the biggest thing for me is, to your point about those corridors and making sure that we have, logical corridor, easement when things do get subdivided.
And I have been in a kind of a good conversation with, is it Jacob Schneider, who is the planning and zoning administrator over with Polk County, and he is really concerned with, once that bridge comes in, and really kind of addressing that corridor in the 2 locations before, so we're still in that process of really trying to sit down with Reinhardt. There's been some talk about it extending all the way out to Bigland. We just don't foresee people coming over the bridge and driving all the way to Bigland and then driving back into town. We kind of see everybody just heading right up Reinhardt, because that would be the simplest, most effective way. So we are looking at just those small areas then in Reinhardt Township. So it is something that I think everybody's, from my standpoint, I thought we had a lot of really good input from our steering committee members. Usually we don't get that participation, but the county really stepped up. Reid and I met, Jason and I met, the EDA was very involved, the DDA was very involved, so it really became a good plan, because we really had a lot of good participation from every entity. I sat down, met with the school district, so I was pleased that everybody's kind of more into really seeing this land use plan not just sit on the shelf until the next 5 years, but really kind of seeing it maybe progress further. So I did like that. We had even more public participation than we have in the past. We usually get 3 people that comment. I think we had close to 70. So.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? I see none, sir.
Well, thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And if you have any changes, comments, go ahead and get those to myself or Teri, and then we'll get them in the final. We probably, if there aren't any major changes or input, you probably won't get another presentation. You'll just get it as a recommendation for final approval with the resolution. So.
And well, Nancy, Teri, and I will talk, but we'll definitely look at that property next to the CMS and figure out what phase that makes sense to be.
Yes, and it would be beneficial for us to add it now, because if in fact that local road program does open up and there is some funds available to that, it would be nice to have it in the plan so that we can use the plan if we want to see that road built.
I mean, we can't change it?
Yeah, I want it in first. I don't want to go through that again.
That was meant as a job. So.
Just a quick question. Just to kind of follow on your last statement there, Nancy, have we gotten any feedback from the school district if they're interested in this proposal?
They are interested in the road. I don't think they feel they're going to expand past the road, so they would be interested in the possibility of selling that. But again, since it's a state entity, a public school district, I think there's a few hoops involved with them, making a profit off of that land or selling it. And then their second issue was, obviously, they would be special assessed, for whatever remaining portion of that road wasn't paid for by the local road program, and they were very concerned about that because they own the property on both sides. So that's why we had kind of suggested, or Mark had suggested, that maybe selling that property and building houses there would be, then you would have houses there to help pay for that special assessment. So it's in a process. I think they're interested, but I think the idea of what it would take to do it right now is a little beyond where they're ready to head. But that doesn't mean that if that local roads program opens up and we can get money for that, a substantial portion, they're all in favor of having that back end road because it would definitely pull a lot of traffic off of Bigland, which is, still a big safety issue. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Mr. Elms?
I have just one question. Thank you, Mr. President. On your map where you're showing the new bridge alignments, if this thing gets voted for or whatever, is that not locking that in there at a particular point, is it? That's just showing where it possibly could be?
At this point, yes. Knowing that you have a 5-year cycle to do your next plan, we just wanted to identify it to acknowledge that it's there, and there are efforts you can make more on maybe the infrastructure planning that's beyond a land use plan for that. But it probably is an issue in your next land use plan, if not the one after that, where you'll really have to start to design. That being said, you can amend your land use plan at any time. So if you knew when and where that bridge is coming and you didn't feel like waiting another 5 years is appropriate, you can always do an amendment.
And we would. Those locations are based on the past bridge study. So those were identified in the bridge study. So that's why we put the 2 on there that would be within our jurisdiction. So we just turn around and amend it before we started really going towards certain funds and things like that.
Yeah,
so.
well, we all wish that we knew where they were going to go for sure, but.
When?
And when, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
Right. Anybody else have anything? I see none. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to number 3, consider reported feasibility of 5th Avenue Northwest and 20th Street Northwest. Mr. Emery.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, council. So we have completed the reported feasibility, which is included in your packet. And I guess, the first thing is, just, what do we know today? Why is there a need for the project? 5th and 20th are currently about 48 years old. And I think, as everyone knows, they're, very poor condition and have been patched numerous times by the city over the years just to basically maintain traffic over there. The curb and gutter showing areas of settlement, heaving, not allowing for proper drainage over there, which just leads to increased issues with, water getting into the subgrade and such. The existing bituminous streets are showing signs of distress, including alligator cracking, rutting, which are all signs of a inadequate pavement section. And then we did in May of 2020, we did complete about 8 borings over there in the street. And what the soil borings showed was a very non-uniform street section over there. The aggregate base, gravel base, ranged from anywhere from 4 to 10 inches thick, with the bituminous ranging from anywhere from 2 to 7 inches thick. So just really a mixed bag of everything over there. And then kind of looking back to the last time that those streets had any type of typical maintenance completed on them, whether it's seal coat, mill and overlay, that last project was completed back in 1987. So about 34 years, those streets have really been pretty much neglected. So, kind of the proposed project, again, if we're looking at a total reconstruction, we would look at replacing, the entire storm sewer system, which would include all the mainline storm sewer, manholes, catch basins. As part of the project, we'd also look at putting in a drain tile system, which would just help remove that subgrade moisture, which just leads to, increased heaving, movement of the streets. Further, I think Jason and his staff, they've televised those areas, and, and that televising really shows too that storm sewer is just in tough shape. So, again, just kind of showing the need to replace that. Sanitary sewer, a lot of the sanitary sewer in that area is really in the back easements. So what we've kind of figured there now is we do have about 285 linear feet of sanitary sewer that is in the street or crossing the street. So, we would look at replacing, those stretches prior to any reconstruction. And then water main improvements, we'd look at replacing about 2,500 linear feet of asbestos concrete piping, which would include replacing the hydrants, gate valves, and all the individual services from the main up to the curb stop. And then in the report of feasibility right now, we did look at two options. Option one, which would be basically total reconstruction with concrete curb and gutter and a concrete or 7-inch non-reinforced concrete paving. And then also included in those options would be, construction of 4 inches of concrete sidewalk along that entire corridor. Right now there's, for whatever reason, when you look at that corridor, there's a lot of areas that have sidewalk, but then there's areas too where there's, pretty big gaps. So of course, with reconstruction, we would, put sidewalk throughout that entire project corridor. And then option number two that we looked at would be basically a bituminous street section with the same concrete work. So, anytime you look at your flexible pavements, you do have, a thicker gravel section, with the concrete. We were looking at about a 10-inch section of gravel. With the bituminous, we're probably looking at about 18 inches of gravel. So kind of an estimate of just project costs that we came up with at this time. For the storm sewer improvements, which I mentioned again would be all the main line, manholes, catch basins, drain tile. And this cost does include, any preparation of plans and specs, staking and inspection, project administration type stuff. We do have contingencies, about a 10 to 15% contingency built into these costs at this point too. But again, right now we're looking at about, for the storm sewer, about $433,242, nice round numbers. And then also in that storm sewer cost, right now we have figured, in the storm sewer cost, we've figured basically a section of the road would be removed, kind of basically removed and replaced as part of that utility replacement. And what we just figured is basically a 15-foot wide section of roadway times the length of the storm sewer piping, and then about 15 feet of curb and gutter at each catch basin location. Water main improvement, like I said, we have figured about 2,500 linear feet of water main replacement. We're estimating that total project cost of about $557,259. And within that water main improvement cost, we have figured basically removal and replacement of the existing sidewalk would be picked up underneath that water main project cost. Because anytime we end up in any of these water main jobs, kind of like Central Avenue, you end up pretty much replacing a large majority, if not all of the sidewalk, just to bring it all into ADA compliance, getting all the curb ramps into compliance with ADA standards. So in my discussion with Keith Mickleseth, he feels that with that asbestos concrete pipe, you know, they do have some years of life left in that pipe. So his thought is, if we went total reconstruction with concrete paving, at that point they would, you know, look at participating, having the water main replaced. His thought is, if we're looking at option number 2, bituminous, they would probably just look at leaving the existing water main in place at this time. His thought is within, you know, another 15, 20 years, you're going to be doing a mill and overlay again. So his thought is they would just at that time, you know, probably look at replacing the water main. So, and then sanitary sewer, like I said, not a lot of sanitary sewer on this project. So we're estimating a total project cost of about $107,000. Again, just to replace the small amount of mainline sewer that's in the street and or crossing the street. So again, like I said, right now, the above utility improvements, you know, we've assumed that those would be paid for utilizing the enterprise funds and not assessed. So with that, so street improvement option 1, again, which was concrete paving, we're estimating the total project cost for that of about, you know, just roughly 1.9 million. So the estimate out of that, then the estimated total project cost to be assessed is about 1.52 million. And then option number 2, again, which would be the bituminous option, we're estimating about 1.55 million, and of that, about 1.42 million would be assessed. So with those dollar amounts, and then looking at the, you know, the project area, what areas could be assessed, we're coming up with an estimated assessment rate for option number 1, again, which was concrete paving, of about $305.66 per front foot, and $101.89 per end benefit. And again, the end benefit is always 1/3 the front benefit. So, and then option number 2, $285 per front foot and $95 per end benefit. So really, you know, not a huge difference. You know, and my thought is kind of looking at the 2, and we'll get into that too, but you know, for the minor difference, I think in the long run, the concrete's going to be cheaper because you're, you know, you build it once, you're building a 40 to 50 year street, where within that 40 to 50 years on a bituminous street, you know, you probably got 3-4 maintenance activities, again, seal coats, mill and overlays. So I think in the long run, you know, option 1 is probably the more feasible option, but again, just kind of laying out everything right now. So, so with that, you know, I basically provided kind of a project map, just so it's clear what the actual project area included. I included estimates for all of the different utility replacements. And then I also did include in your packet kind of a preliminary assessment roll for option 1 and option 2. So one thing I just kind of looked at is with option number 1, I just picked a property, probably one of the bigger properties. You know, his total assessment was about $32,848 with the concrete option. And then if I look at that same property, you know, with the bituminous option, we're about $30,655. So a difference of what, a little over $2,000. So again, not a huge difference. So I guess with that, I'll just, at this point, I'll just open up maybe for any questions you have.
Mayor.
Can toss in. It's good information to have. Thanks for putting it all together. Thanks, Keith Nicholseth and Water and Light, for your input that you've given and the guidance as to if it's going to be asphalt, probably not. If it's going to be concrete, probably yes. And for the council to consider the pros and cons of asphalt versus concrete, that's probably a good thing. Ultimately, it's going to come from a petition from the neighbors as to their preference. And We're going to meet with them, as you know, in the not-too-distant future to request them to circulate that petition and bring it in. And the hope would still be to try to get some project bid and built, bid through this winter, built as soon as next year, ideally would be our hope to get that done. And as we're all aware, we will, upon receiving the petition, we turn around and put together the final bid proposal, get bids, receive the bids, take a look at what would be the most competitive bid, and before that bid would be awarded, we'd wait through the appeals period of any of the residents to see, just to make sure that everybody's on board, everybody's satisfied with what's going to be happening there. And so the decision of concrete versus asphalt will fall into the hands nicely of the residents affected by this. And yet, at that meeting, if anyone on the council has some strong views to help guide the residents to the pros and cons of each, there would be opportunity to do that. We all know that a brand new concrete street is going to be the best bet, particularly since it would bring in water and light in this case to help offset some of the cost, because they would decide that they wouldn't want to disrupt that for the next 40, 50 years, not to break up that brand new street going in. And so it would create a really nice incentive for the neighborhood to go ahead with a full concrete replacement, I think. Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions? Mr. Bitter?
Thank you. Are you rebuilding it to the same width that it is now?
Yes, that's what we figured, yep, 41 foot wide.
Mr. Helms?
Steve, can you explain to me on your map there that you put in there, why are some being billed front and end benefits both, and some aren't? What's? I'm just curious what that is there, or why it's the way it is there. You got the yellow and the blue there.
Yeah, so like, I don't know how to, the best way to explain it, but it's really hard when I gotta look upside down too, but, so I guess if you look, like say in this area, Dale, basically they're receiving a front from 20th, but then they're also receiving an end from 5th, which kind of goes, about halfway each direction. So like here now, let's just say these 6-8 lots right here, again, they're receiving a front from 20th, but they would actually, in the future, they would actually receive an end from 8th Avenue if anything was ever done there. Then your end benefits from 8th would go back, let's say roughly halfway.
How far do they figure that?
An end?
Up a block or whatever. How did they determine that?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to really explain fronts and ends, and that's what we try to do even in an assessment hearing, is if you think of it as a nice square block, your ends then for your side streets just go back halfway each direction. So if you have it a 400-foot block, your ends will go back about 200 feet each direction.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, how far. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wondering on the same token, why aren't 3, 4, 5 of second edition on Garden Court given an end benefit on that map?
3
lot or I don't know what.
We're at, Mark?
Second edition.
On the east side of Garden Court, second edition, lots 3, 4, 5 should be end benefits, I would imagine.
3, all right there. Yeah, I mean, they would probably get their front from, let's say, Garden right in front of them, and then, Garden to the north of them there was, if that whole stretch was done.
Well, I mean, you're assessing ends on the opposite side of the road. I would think that you would go down the same side. I mean, it's not like you're stopping at Garden Court and then, if you were stopping at Garden Court on Fifth, then that side of the road would just get halves.
Yep.
But if you're, now that you're going all the way down, why aren't, and I would imagine as you go Fifth
Yeah, I see what you're
south,
saying.
you're gonna get ends on 1 and 2, or 1, 2, 3. You could Fifth, I would say 1 and 2, because you're already past 3 on Fifth.
Right.
And then you're gonna get the ends on the south side and the west side of
Yeah.
Garden.
It's something we could look at, Mark. I mean, yeah, maybe that's something we overlooked.
What's that?
Same with 9 and 10, should have end benefits also, front and end.
No, they shouldn't have an end, should they?
9 and 10 would
That's
get
true.
an end from Garden Court.
Yeah. They get it, when you do Garden Court, they would get an end.
9, 10, and half
On
of 8 or whatever, yeah.
Question for you, Steve, on that. If we look at,
Confusing. I don't know how they figure that out.
Yeah.
if we look at this area, though that is an end, but these are all fronts. Does that matter? So this is end, but these are all fronts.
Right.
So if this is picked up all by front benefits, these two would generate end benefits, whereas this, because it's a front street, would
Yeah.
not. It doesn't even generate an end benefit,
Right.
because it's all fronts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just,
This is,
actually, as I look at it, I'm just kind of in my head now, I'm looking, do 1 through 5 there, do they all kind of get an end benefit from Fifth?
I would say 3 through 5, and then 1 and 2 get it when 15 and 16 get it when you go
Yeah.
Fifth Avenue south of there.
Yeah. One thing about end benefits, they're always real easy when it's a nice square, everything's square, but yeah, you got to think about them a little bit. So that's something I can look at, Mark, a little more.
did you get my question? So up here, lots 4 and 5,
Yep.
Fifth along there is an end, okay? And that's why you'd have an end coming this way.
Yeah,
But
okay.
Fifth down here is a front only.
Correct. For 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right?
Yeah, 10, 9, 8, 7, yeah, those
Yeah.
are all fronts, and so it's not an end to them, it's a front to them. So the street itself doesn't generate an end benefit if it's a front benefit to somebody.
Because
Yeah.
across the street, 9 and 10, right on Fifth across the street are getting front and end.
And they're getting an end from
20th.
20th.
And that's Mark's argument and my argument. 3, 4, 5, 9, and 10 should have an end benefit also then.
3, 4, 5, 9, and 10.
Which 9 and 10?
9 and 10 on Fifth.
Abutting up to a 4 and 5 that you brought up.
On the garden court side there.
No, because you wouldn't give them 9 and 10 end benefit because
Because why?
They would get an
they
end
get
from
an end benefit when you do Garden
Garden
Court.
Court, yeah.
Well, then so would 9 and 10 across the street then.
No, because they're going halfway down that side of the block
Right.
for 20th.
Only one
Because
side of the block.
if Garden Court kept going across, then yeah, they'd be in between Garden Court. Because you got to go to where the next road goes back.
Only connecting streets that are an end of someone's lot generate an end benefit. In your normal grid, the only streets that generate end benefits are the ones that run along the side yards.
Right.
The ones that run along the front yards don't even generate an end benefit.
Yeah, they do.
They still generate.
If you have say you had a block that was square instead of rectangle, then those people down the square block would get an end benefit on a front benefit.
Yep.
But it doesn't make sense to do that because then you got a bunch of wasted space in the
Well, anyway,
square.
it's something that you might want to
take a look
relook
at.
at.
We'll look at that a little bit more.
How it's,
Like I said,
it does
it's-
look kind of crazy there.
It's,
And then my second question was wondering if, since this is new construction, I don't think we have a specific spec for the city, but wondering if it would be advisable or what the benefits versus costs of putting drain tile into that city new construction spec.
drain tile is already included in the cost estimates.
I don't see it.
If you go, actually, I got it
said
right,
that.
where I got it, Mark, is under the storm sewer.
Oh, you put it in storm.
Yep,
in
it's
the
right here.
streets.
So yeah, we have about 4,600 feet of drain tile figured in there.
Anything else, Mark?
So what's the next?
I don't know if that should
Yeah,
all be,
it's-
I don't think that should all be storm sewer. paid for.
Do you think that should be in the
I think
street?
that's a street spec.
Now,
My opinion,
what's the next
but-
step from here on this now to take it to the people?
Community neighborhood meeting.
Yeah, so really our next step then would be to file next week. You basically accept the report of feasibility, and then we would just set a date for the improvement hearing.
I was gonna ask that question. So for clarification for staff, so I know what to send out. So we are gonna have a neighborhood meeting. Because typically when we accept a report of feasibility, we set the improvement hearing in that same resolution. So my question is, are we only gonna be accepting the report of feasibility? And then we'll have to pass another resolution for setting the improvement hearing if we're having a neighborhood meeting first?
What is your thought on that, Steve? I think you had kind of a game plan going forward. What were you thinking?
Well, my hope was instead of doing another neighborhood meeting, the improvement hearing would improvement hearing / neighborhood meeting would just be one meeting. And
Yep, roll them into one. But make sure the neighbors know that the next step is really for them. If they want this to happen, then it
Okay.
has to come through the petition process.
Okay, but setting that improvement hearing, that's direction by the council and not getting a petition from the neighborhood.
Mr. Gulsted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just curious on why on this one, we're asking for a petition from the neighbors on any other street project. The city goes ahead and does a feasibility study, puts it out there, and then lets them decide at that point in time.
So we don't get sued.
Well, I mean, you have different ways to go ahead and do that. It's just not the typical project or process that we're taking. So I'm just curious if we're changing everything or if there's something specific to this project that requires us to have them come to us and ask for the project to be made.
So typically, I think the report of feasibility can be either authorized by the city council, or, the residents can bring forward a petition for a project, and then the council would, move ahead with the report of feasibility. So, maybe in this case, like you said, we wouldn't necessarily, I don't think, need a petition from the property owners. We would just hold the improvement hearing, and then based on feedback from that improvement hearing, then you, the council, would have to decide, based on what you heard that night, okay, now do we move ahead with plans and specs?
Well, yeah, because to just get back at what Mr. Demers indicated is that we can time it so that if there's going to be objections or any of those types of things, rather than awarding the bid, we can time it so that the bid doesn't get awarded prior to any of the objection timeframes, if that's what we're concerned about. So
And secondly, I think if you hold the improvement hearing and everyone's absolutely, totally against the potential project, then as a council, you don't even move ahead with preparation of plans and specs.
That has to happen.
Correct.
That's the whole purpose of having the meeting, is so that it is in the hands of those residents. And if they have a strong preference to do neither of these, then we have to just not do either one of these.
Right.
So go forward as normal with plans and specs and improvement hearing?
And then with that, I will send out all the information, both assessment roles, both options, all that kind of stuff. So just so you're all aware, if you do get a call, they will have received all the information, but they might need some clarification working through what they're looking at.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Steve.
And then I think, if we've been telling them we're going to have this additional meeting, you might want to make sure that they understand that it's combined.
Yeah, this is the meeting.
Yes.
This is their opportunity.
So that they're not thinking that there's going to be
Yeah.
another one that they have an opportunity to address the council.
Megan, in the notification that you send, would you please make them aware of that?
I can, but it doesn't mean they'll read it.
Right.
Right, anything else on that? If not, we'll move on.
Questions, call Steve.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Emery. Move on to number 4, request to purchase Zamboni ice resurfacer. Reid.
All right, thank you, Mr. President, council members. This Zamboni is in the budget for 2022, so next year's budget. Coming a little ahead of the final approval of next year's budget due to the lead time on the order of the compressors, or I'm sorry, the Zamboni. Currently, the orders are approximately 9 months out from when we order it to delivery, so I'm just a little bit tentative on, if we can get it approved and get the order in place, we'll make sure we could have the Zamboni here ahead of the start of next ice season, 2022 ice season. The payment for the Zamboni, currently we plan it in our capital improvement financing fund, the payment, so it's spread out. The payment is scheduled over the course of 9 years. We wouldn't make any down payment on it up front. It'd be payment due on delivery of the machine, so sometime September, October next year is when we would owe any payment on an order. So included in the packet, I included the proposal. The Zamboni that I'm proposing is a gas-powered Zamboni. That's the same that we have within the ice arenas right now. This is basically just the 22 model of the same Zamboni we're operating at the Civic Center right now. By continuing on the same model unit number on Zamboni, we would have essentially the same Zamboni, just different year models within all 3 of our ice arenas. So from an operator standpoint, that makes it really slick that we can train them across all 3 arenas and have them understand and know how to operate the machine once they get into each rink to work at. So with that, just seeking approval for that so I can go ahead and get the order placed. Just for comparative sake, we did in the CIP financing fund, if you look at that budget line item, we had $152,000 in that. The price of this gas Zamboni is about $121,000. When we budgeted for it, we were budgeting for an electric or a battery powered Zamboni a few years ago. I did seek pricing on those first. The price for the lead acid battery Zamboni is up to about $165,000 now. They have a lithium ion battery that's another $15,000 in addition to that. And if and when we ever want to go to a battery powered, the Civic Center is where this Zamboni would be located. We would need phase 3 power to the site the Zamboni parks, and that is ballpark another $15,000 or $20,000 on top of the cost of the machine. So with all that said, I think I'm happy and comfortable to stick with the gas powered machine for now.
Anybody have any questions for Reid?
When you say gas, you mean propane?
No, this is gas, unleaded fuel.
Really?
Yep. All 3 that we have in our current arenas are that now. The question on that is typically people would question the air quality, the indoor air quality with the exhaust coming out of the machines. We do air quality testing twice a week in all 3 of our arenas, and the numbers have never been at a rate that we need to be concerned about. The propane does give off some exhaust as well. The really nice thing about the Zamboni machines is they're built in California, and they need to meet the California engine emission standards when they're built there. So they come to us from California, which I think really helps with making sure those exhaust levels are as low as they can possibly be.
Governor Walz will love you then.
Cool.
Yeah, Bill.
May I toss in one more thing? Reid, just please pass on to your crew the feedback. The North End Community Garden has been managed amazingly well again this year. It's all put back to black and ready to go for next year. Please thank your folks and thank you for the management that you provide for that effort. Looks good.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Entertaining a motion to adjourn. Moved by Johnson. Second by Vetter. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. Means adjourned.
Don't worry.
An hour and it was late.